एवमेव द्रव्यगुणविषये स्नातकोत्तर पदवीन्द्र ALNRM Ayurvedic Medical College Koppa तः प्राप्नोत्। अस्य महोदयस्य 20+ अध्यापनानुभवः वर्तते। अयं महोदयः आयुर्वेद प्रशिक्षक रूपेण अमेरिकादेशे एवमेव SN विश्वविद्यालये MSc पाठ्यक्रमस्य अध्यापकः अस्ति। अधुना अयं महोदयः आयुर्सिम सिम्युलेशन्स फॉर आयुर्वेदा क्लिनिकल टीचिंग इति परियोजनायाः सह प्रधान परिशोधकः वर्तते। एवमेव अमृता IKS अमृता भारतीय विज्ञान परंपरायाः आयुर्वेदः व्याकरणम् एवं दर्शनं केन्द्रस्य प्रधान परिशोधकः वर्तते। अयं महोदयः आयुर्वेद रत्नः धन्वन्तरिः भिषग्भूषणः आयुर्वेदमार्गप्रवर्तकः इत्येवमादिभिः उपाधिभिः देश-विदेशेषु सम्मानितः वर्तते। अयं सम्प्रति कैलिफोर्नियास्थ सैन फ्रांसिस्को विश्वविद्यालयेन ऑस्ट्रेलिया देशस्य वेस्टर्न सिडनी विश्वविद्यालयेन च सहकार्यम् इंटीग्रेटिव ऑन्कोलॉजी विषये शोधपरियोजनानां निर्माणे मग्नः अस्ति। अस्य महोदयस्य नाम्नि बहूनि शोधपत्राणि बहवः शोधलेखाः च वर्तन्ते। सम्प्रति अयम् अमृता आयुर्वेदोन्नत संशोधन केन्द्रस्य निदेशकः वर्तते। Now I would like to hand over it to Professor Rammanohar.
अत्र आगतेभ्यो विद्वज्जनेभ्यः सर्वेभ्यश्च मम विनीतप्रणामः. I will be delivering my talk in English. So I'll be trying to present Ayurveda as the holistic science of health and well-being. There are already technical issues. So I would like to cover the topic today in 3 sections. First of all, we will look at Ayurveda and its evolution from a historical perspective. I want to highlight the fact that what we have in the form of Ayurveda is only a fraction of what it was and what it can become, because there has been a lot of loss of knowledge in the flow of time. And one of the ways in which we can retrieve it is through a very deep study of texts and also a deep inquiry into the traditions, many of which, we saw disappearing in modern times. The second point I would like to make is, I don't want to present Ayurveda as a science that is a replacement or something better than modern medicine. I'd like to highlight how Ayurveda and modern medicine can complement each other. And in this perspective, we're already in that slide. So one is the historical development, how Ayurveda is different from modern medicine, and how Ayurveda can contribute to global healthcare. That's what I would like to say. If you look at the historical development of Ayurveda, the origins. So it's a clear picture of it. So the origins of Ayurveda are lost in antiquity. I mean, we cannot see through the mists of time. It's very important to understand this aspect, because it's very difficult to find out even what were the earlier versions of some of the texts that are available today. Like Charaka Samhita, Sushruta Samhita, they are all, very modern in one sense, because they went through a lot of editions and revisions. And as we look back into their origins, I mean, they just disappear into time. So we have a very, very, very rich literary tradition. India has one of the richest collection of medical manuscripts in the whole world. And it's a pity that less than 10% of this has been fully explored. So I'm just trying to point out here, if we were to, this is just representative, if we were to place all the Ayurvedic textbooks, manuscripts available on the map of India, I mean, it would cover the entire length and breadth of the country. And if we were to link it with all the chronological, timeline covering all the major periods, you would find that at no point of time, there was no intellectual activity in the field of Ayurveda. So Ayurveda has been created, this knowledge system has been created through a very long timeline with participation from every nook and corner of the country and a continuous updation. That is what is, a really unique feature of the whole Ayurvedic tradition. So Ayurvedic texts, what we are studying today are only some of the major textbooks, which are termed as Brihatrayi, the greater triad, and then the Lakhutrayi or the lesser triad. And, these are very symbolic. In fact, the names, so Brihatrayi and Lakhutrayi are categories of texts, that constitute the core of Ayurveda today. But what I wanted to say is that these are just, very symbolic representations of the entire Ayurvedic medical literature. For example, Brihatrayi, that name itself is very symbolic. We have Charaka, Sushruta, and Vagbhada. Charaka, Charayveti, Sushruta, Sushtushrutaha, and Vagbhada is Vachi Bhadaha. So even the whole literature has been structured in such a way that the process of knowledge building is communicated through even the names of these texts. Charaka is the explorer. It says, to compile the knowledge, you have to explore the whole world. And Sushruta is well heard, the listener. And Vagbhada is the Vachi Bhadaha, or the one who expresses this knowledge. So the Brihatra itself is actually representing how the medical tradition should renew itself. I mean, they are not actually rigid textbooks. So the Ayurvedic tradition was continuously renewed through this process of Charaka, Sushruta, and Vagbhada. And what is interesting is that Ayurvedic literary tradition is interesting the whole of IKS because of the very rigorous format for technical writing. What we call as Tantra Yuktis, it's most elaborately discussed only in the Ayurvedic tradition. Apart from that, we find this also in Kautilya's Arthashastra and then the Vishnu Dharmottara Purana. Otherwise, the most systematic exposition of how technical writing, I mean, differentiating it from, other kinds of writing is elaborated in the Ayurvedic tradition. So you have Samhitas, Nikandus, Sutras, Vyakhyas, Yoga Sangrahas, Prakarana Granthas, just to name a few. So, interestingly, Ayurveda was one of the earliest medical systems in the world to differentiate into the medical school and the surgical school. So we have Dhanvantari Sampradaya focusing on surgery and the ＡCઆRA Sampradaya on medicine. And Ayurveda was created by a great lineage of teachers. I mean, we cannot even count and list all these great personalities. And I think it's very, very important that we get introduced to Ayurveda through these great personalities and not just by the content. Ayurveda is also a robust knowledge system. There were a lot of debates, discussions, individual contributions across the whole timeline. This has not been constructed. The most elaborate attempt to do this is by a Western scholar. It's a matter of, shame that this did not happen in India. History of Indian medical literature is a huge voluminous work published from Netherlands by a Dutch psychiatrist, in which for the first time, there is a complete compilation of all the known textbooks of Ayurveda and all the great contributors to this whole tradition of Ayurveda. And you can see in all different fields, Bharadwaja was, one of the pioneering teachers of Ayurveda. Agastya, the propagator of Siddha medicine, Dhanvantari for surgical school, ＡCઆRA medical school, Charaka, who was a redactor, who revised, made a major revision of the text of, Agnivesha. Kashyapa was the first, you can say Kashyapa was the first pediatrician in the world. Pediatrics is a branch of medicine that developed in modern medicine only a couple of centuries ago. But 3,000 years ago in India, we had the first textbook of pediatrics called Kashyapa Samhita, which is again available only in a mutilated form. Now, when we look at this whole tradition, that's a point I want to make. What we find and understand is that only a fraction of the knowledge of, codified knowledge of Ayurveda itself has been preserved. But, no, it is pediatrics. There are other Kashyapas also. The Kashyapa Samhita in Ayurveda deals with pediatrics. So this book is also known as the Vriddha Jivaka Tantra, and it's exclusively focused on food. So what is interesting here is that this, I think, is very relevant today, that Ayurveda, through a mythological story of its origin from Brahma, Prajapatis, Ashwinis and Indra, gives us the idea that the real source of the knowledge of Ayurveda is nature itself and not the books. And so, in order to recover Ayurveda today, we need to actually read also the book of nature and not just these textbooks. The textbooks become a guide to give us a framework on how to discover Ayurveda from nature directly. So, Bharadwaja was a pioneer, and we have for the first, I think we could characterize this as the first World Health Assembly in the Himalayas. You know, when there is a crisis of health in the world, the sages are assembling together at the foothills of Himalayas and inquiring, and we find a historical discussion on the agenda of the meeting was to find a solution to health problems that plague humankind. I think one of the things that Ayurveda can bring into modern healthcare is the idea of compassion. That, you know, the whole discovery of Ayurveda, this we are taught in the textbooks, this idea is preserved throughout its literary tradition, that the real purpose, because once I was in a meeting, you know, where we were discussing about cancer, and then, you know, one of the participants mentioned that cancer is the next big opportunity. I mean, can you imagine where medicine has reached today? So Ayurveda has tried to preserve this, the purity of the purpose. So I'll just skip a few slides. Yes. So when we are looking at the whole tradition of Ayurveda, I think what it brings to IK is also Ayurveda is one of the medical systems that has, you know, survived into modern times as a practical system. And this has been possible because of its ability to innovate, regenerate and recreate itself. You know, and that is clearly mentioned in the text, that the Ayurvedic knowledge is grasped and forgotten from time to time. Discovery of Ayurveda is called Avabodha and its transmission is called Upadesha. But that this Avabodha and Upadesha can get distorted, and we have to rediscover this knowledge from time to time. Now, what I want to point, there was a question earlier in the morning about, you know, student-centric learning, and this is, Ayurveda is a very good example of student-centric learning. The most celebrated textbook of Ayurveda, called Charaka Samhita, it might surprise many of you to know that it is actually the notes of a student. It is a student's note that got elevated into the most celebrated textbook of Ayurveda. The Charaka Samhita originally was called Agnivesha Tantra. Agnivesha was one of the most, you know, brilliant disciples of sage ＡCઆRA. And Ramasubramanianji was also mentioning about how, you know, the abilities of the student, and it makes a difference, you know, when the teaching is transmitted. We have this famous sloka in the Charaka Samhita, Buddher Visheshas Tatrasi, Nopadeshandaram Munehe, Tantrasya Karta Prathamam Agnivesho Yatokhavan. So Agnivesha was such a brilliant student that the teacher decided that the first textbook on Ayurveda should be in the name of the student itself and not the teacher. So Agnivesha also means, you know, one who can enter into the fire of self-transformation. So Ayurveda also represents a very student-centric approach to learning. In fact, the Charaka Samhita says that unless there is a question, there was also this debate earlier about whether questioning is allowed in the Indian tradition. So what Ayurveda, Charaka Samhita says is that if there is no question, there is no teaching. Apradushtena bhavena prasannena antaratmana shishyena samyak prishtasya guror buddhi prakashata. So if there is no samyak prashna from the shishya, then there is no answer from the from the teacher. So Sushruta Samhita is also the compilation of a student's note. Sushruta was the disciple of Dhanvantari, and the Thus, we can say that the learning was student-centric and education was student-empowering. I mean, every time the text was, revised, new knowledge had to be accommodated, and it had to be, because the whole idea is that the proof of the tradition, there is no research separately. The Ayurvedic tradition was verified through the process of teaching itself. That is how in our tradition the word Veda is explained. Sattayam vidyade veti jnane vinde vicharane vindade vindadi prapto rupa veda videyami. So the teacher first experiences satta, what is reality, and then he presents it as a jnana or concept. The student will do the vichara on this jnana and get the prapti or experience. Only then there is a parampara. Parampara means param aparam karoti. That which is param or beyond the reach of the student is made within, it's brought within the experience, tangible experience of the student. So student is the proof for the tradition. If this transmission does not happen, then there is no tradition anymore. So that is why it was a student-centric. Always the textbooks are named after the student who learned it and not the teacher who actually, preaches it. Because that the student has learned is the proof of the success of it. And we have also in Ayurveda a very elaborate method. Okay, this is a pediatric school. So, and what is surprising is there are so many textbooks that have been lost. So what I wanted to highlight here is that we cannot make a judgment of what Ayurveda was by just looking at the textbooks that are available. Like, for example, the Bhela Samhita is so important. It was discovered, only one manuscript was discovered in mutilated form from, Andhra Pradesh region long back, a Telugu version of this manuscript. And this is very interesting textbook because the earliest descriptions of what we call today as blood circulation is found only in this text. Hrido raso nisaradi, tasmad edi cha sarvada, sirabhir hridayam vedi tasmad hir prabhavasira. This textbook also distinguishes between the retina and the visual cortex by saying chakshur vaisheshikam alojaka pittam and buddhir vaisheshikam alojaka. This is not found in any other textbook. And there has been a big debate on where the mind is located. Generally, it is felt that in the traditional knowledge systems, we mistook the heart to be the brain rather than the brain. But Bhela Samhita very clearly mentions Siras Thalundaragadam Sarvendriya Param Manahar. Hridayam is Chetana Sthanam, Manas is Achetana. And so Hridaya is not the sthana of Manas. The sthana of Manas is the Shiras. So many textbooks of Jatugarna, Parashara, Harida, these are all, lost and not available. But interestingly, the Bhela Samhita survived through a lineage of traditional healing in Kerala. Even today, we have a caste of physicians in Kerala who are called as Velas. So this means that we have to study not just the text, but also the practical traditions to completely recover the knowledge of Ayurveda. Okay. Now, I also want to highlight that Ayurveda was one of the earliest systems to specialize, as a medical system into general medicine. There are 8 branches which further also, specialized into further subdisciplines. And we have lost various textbooks. Like there is a book of a sage called Nini, who was an ophthalmologist. And there was Bhoja's Tantra on surgery, which are completely lost. So a lot of the specialized traditions of Ayurveda have been lost in the flow of time. And one of the, today we talk about systematic review. I just wanted to give a quick overview of how Ayurveda is a knowledge system and a knowledge tradition, and how attempts were made to codify, recover, and update the knowledge of Ayurveda from time to time. Today we know about systematic review, synthesized evidence, when there's too much of information available. So Vagbhada is talking about this information explosion. He says, Tebhyo ativiprakirnebhya praya saradarochaya kriyate ashtanga hridayam nati sankshepa vistaram. So Vagbhada comes at a time when this knowledge tradition had exploded and expanded so much that people had no way to even read and complete all this in one lifetime. Pratitantrabhi yoge tu purusha ayusha samshaya. If even we were to study one of these three theses, you will need one whole lifetime to complete it. So he comes here and creates an amazing system. I would call this as one of the earliest attempts of a systematic review of synthesizing evidence from all the textbooks that are available. And he created Ashtanga Sangraha, which was then further simplified into Ashtanga Hridaya. Okay, I mentioned this already. And another interesting thing is pluralism, medical pluralism. Charaka Samhita is perhaps one of the earliest texts which talked about different approaches to healing. So Ayurveda is not a rigid system. Ayurveda was trying to synthesize, different approaches to healthcare. Charaka says, Vividhani hi shastrani bhishajam pracharanti loke. There is not just one medical approach. There are so many approaches to medicine. And so we can also say that Ayurveda was one of the earliest systems to bring an integrative framework, to bring an inclusive approach to accommodate different approaches to healing. And we have also very important concepts in Ayurveda that parathigare natu vistarokti. The whole system was very well organized. One specialist would not interfere in the area of another. And interestingly, we have also references to specialists like Arbudatnyaha. Arbudatnya means in today's terms an oncologist. So Sushruta is talking about specialization to such an extent that you had people who knew only about Arbuda. Now you may ask, is this holism? So Ayurveda experimented with specialization, and then we had bringing back them into more holistic healers. That's how in Kerala we have the Ashtavaidya tradition, who specialize in all 8 branches, so that they don't become lost, in specialization. So Ayurveda also experimented with specialization. We have also psychiatrists. This is discussed in Charaka Samhita, people who are specialized only in mental diseases. So we have, Ayurveda has been developed through a process of healthy discussions and debates. So you can find many chapters in the Charaka Samhita are summaries of debates. They are not didactic statements. And there you can see rebuttal of other viewpoints, acceptance of other viewpoints, Swatantra and Paratantra Samkhya's universal terminologies, terminology specific to specific schools, all these things you can find. Yes, I'll just skip a few slides. And there have been new knowledge that has been created in the flow of Ayurvedic tradition. And once again, I want to point out the Ayurvedic method of learning. One process was also questioning the teacher or the guru. Padarthoda padacheda, vakyartho vakyayojana, akshepoda samadhanam, vyakhyanam shadvetam. So when you are doing a vyakhya of the text, you have to first, that is the point of obedience and the attention, that first you must be willing to understand the teaching before you ask a question. So there you have to have utmost obedience and shraddha. Understand it pada padartha, vakya vakyartha. And once you have understood the import of the teaching, then you are allowed to do what is called as an akshepa. Akshepa is, you can completely refute that, attempt to refute that theory. And the guru has to give the samadhana. And you have to, you can accept that theory or teaching only if the samadhana is satisfying. This was the way Ayurvedic, I have actually witnessed this Mukhamukha Sampradaya in Kerala happening, where I was even surprised who is the guru and who is the, Shishya, because they were engaged in such a, heated argument, and the student had all the freedom to ask whatever questions he wanted. But it was very important that the student first understood. Charaka Samhita very clearly says, Purvam aptobadeshat jnanam, tata pratyakshānumanabhyam pariksha. So first you have to get the jnanam through aptobadesha. So that you cannot compromise. You have to first study and understand the text very, very carefully. Once you have understood that, you have the freedom to question, you have the freedom to experiment. This process was called as pariksha. Where? Oh, I'm very sorry. That is a mistake. My assistant put a wrong picture there. I'm very sorry. Yeah. So it is a commentary So it's an example of a commentary. That's all. There is no other link. So Ayurvedic knowledge was continuously developing, evolving. New theories could be created. I think this is very, very important when we are thinking of modernizing Ayurveda and bringing new applications. I wanted to show that Ayurveda is compatible with such a re-examination and reconstruction. Okay, so lexicographers, we have specialists, the diagnostic, there's an entire textbook exclusively for diagnosis. We have one textbook entirely devoted to pharmacy. So lexicographers. And the Charaka Samhita is very, very particular about continuous scientific debates and engagements. So one chapter called Vimanasthana is exclusively devoted to how to engage in scientific debates, how to be friendly, how to make sure you advance knowledge through debate. This was called in Ayurveda is Tadvidya Sambhasha. Bhisagbhushana Sambhasheta. Physician should engage in a conversation with another physician. Now I am coming to some important insights of Ayurveda. I want to say while Ayurveda did not, anticipate all the discoveries of modern science, it gives us another way of understanding. There are epistemological differences, but in many concepts also overlap with modern discoveries. But I wouldn't say that we anticipated everything the way modern medicine or science has discovered today. One is this concept of microcosm and macrocosm, that the microcosm, and this has led to Ayurveda developing a very nature-centric view, Purushoyam Loka Samhitaha, that the microcosm is a reflection of the macrocosm. And therefore in Ayurveda, when you start the study of Ayurveda, and I want to contrast this with modern medicine. In modern medicine, you start study of medicine by dissecting a dead body, which according to Ayurveda is not the correct sequence of studying medicine. In Ayurveda, we start with Srishti Shariram. We have to understand how Sharira Sthanam, Ityatra Janma Maranam Yatat Samyag Udagradam, Sharirasya Tatasthanam Shariram Idamukshade. How the body emerges and how it gets destroyed. This is the knowledge of Sharira. And there was a TV serial called Mentalist, in which, a mentalist is actually looking at a fake doctor and saying, you are fake because you have compassion. It's not possible in the American medical school to become a doctor with compassion, because the moment you join medical school, a dead body is thrown at you, and then you are overwhelmed by a pile of books. Ayurveda suggests that even the sequencing of the subjects, how you study it, is very, very important. That you first understand how this physical microcosm emerged out of the macrocosm. This is called Srishti Sharira. So you understand, you respect nature, you realize that your health is dependent on the health of nature around, because you are creation from nature. This is the first thing that a student has to understand. Then comes Garbha Sharira, how the macrocosm actually emerges, and then how it functions. So Ayurveda does not have anatomy and physiology. It is Sharira Sthan. Then we have Dosha Sharira, Prakriti Shariram, Marma Shariram, Sankhya Shariram. That is where the anatomy is discussed. It's just before Vikriti Shariram, which explains how this body disintegrates and dies. So we have also an idea of a subatomic body. Charaka Samhita says at a very sukshma level, the body is being created and destroyed with a wink of an eye. This is called Swabhava Paramavada. So the body is visualized as, a manifestation of dancing subatomic particles. We have also idea that at the microscopic level, biological units are innumerable. One of the earliest theories of genetic transmission of disease, Ayurvedic textbooks talk about Bija, Bija Bhaga and Bija Bhaga Avayava. How does someone get a genetic disease? Interestingly, Ayurvedic texts distinguish between genetic disease and congenital disease. Genetic diseases are caused by defect in the bija of the mother and the father. Congenital diseases are caused by unfavorable circumstances in intrauterine life. And here what they have talked about is that the whole body is represented in the bija through bija bhagas and bija bhaga avayavas. And if any bija bhaga or bija bhaga avayava has a tapa or a dushti, then that particular organ in the child will get affected. Generally, there were no attempt to do any genetic manipulation. So all these Sahaja Vyadhis were considered as asadhyas. You cannot, but they identified it. And they developed a theory also. Of course, at the molecular level, they couldn't demonstrate the genome, chromosome, or genes, but this idea was very clearly there. And then what we have very interesting is, these are things I think which should be brought into the history of medicine. Ayurvedic textbooks talk about microscopic life. Clearly, they talk about invisible, chakshurmamsa agocharam, that there are invincible organisms which you cannot see with the naked eye and which can cause diseases. And most interestingly, Ayurvedic texts have talked also about, natural organisms, that this idea of gut microbiome or the microbiome, you can find its traces, origins in Ayurvedic description. Ayurveda classified all organisms into sahaja, the ones which are helpful for the body, which are aparisankheya, which means innumerable, but all of them cannot be seen. They inhabit our body, out of which some are vaikarika, some are pathogenic, majority are non-pathogenic. So these are some of the ideas that you can see in Ayurveda. And Sushruta Samhita is one of the earliest textbooks to clearly talk about a natural course of a disease. What will happen if you don't treat a disease? How will it progress? And what will happen? So for a treatment to be actually effective, you have to modify the course of that prognosis. So now just one more point, I'll skip some more slides. ÄCΑRA discusses the process of respiration succinctly, but I don't think that we have circulation, respiration. Apart from these being very early descriptions of respiration and circulation, I think they also still provide, different models of understanding these processes, which are not fully explained in modern terms. For example, ÄCARA Samhita says, Nabhistha prana pavanaha, prishtva hrit kamalantaram, kanthat bahirviniryati padum vishnu padamritam, pitva chambara piyusham punarayadi vegada, prinayan dehamakilam jivayan jagrana. So our prana from the Nabhi is coming out of the Kantha to Vishnu Padamritam Padam, to drink the Vishnu Padamrita. And Pitva Chamber, after drinking that Ambara Piyusam or the nectar from the air, it gets back into the body, invigorates all parts of your body and also activates your digestive part. Now, what is interesting of circulation of Vela is modern science is talking about blood circulation, whereas Ayurveda is talking about rasa chankramana. And I'm not going into this is very interesting because it is actually the rasa dhatu or the plasma, according to Ayurveda, which circulates and also moves out of the capillaries. Blood doesn't actually come out of the capillaries. So the Ayurvedic terminology of rasa chankramana is actually more accurate than the modern concept of blood circulation, because blood is entrapped in the vessel, whereas rasa or that fluid circulates all over the body. Now, the next point is Ayurveda and modern medicine. So there are a lot of differences between Ayurveda and modern medicine. The modern Ayurvedic concept is that the whole is more than the sum of its parts, whereas the modern understanding is the whole can be understood by studying the parts. When you look at a modern description of the body, you would say, cell, tissue, organ systems, and then the whole body. And it is by breaking it down and studying each individual component, you can understand the whole body. But that's not the way Ayurveda presents it. So breaking down body into constituent parts, whereas Ayurveda understands relationships and networks. So we have another model of, understanding how the human body functions. So therefore, even in treatment, modern medicine isolates single molecules and single targets, whereas Ayurveda is focused on understanding how multiple molecules, target multiple ligands. So one plant in Ayurveda could have 30,000 chemicals, and there's no way through any modern research that we can find out what is the action of all these things together. So, we find differences. The Ayurvedic method of pharmacology is all about combining and making, complex medical. So one of the contributions Ayurveda can make to pharmacology is shift from molecules to molecular cocktails. Create a new branch of molecular combinatorics. So biomolecular mechanisms constitute the basis of biological structures and functions, as well as mental and spiritual expression. So body, mind, and consciousness in Ayurveda is considered as an integral whole. And we believe in the primacy of consciousness over matter. So the modeling of the body is very different. So everything that is mental or spiritual in modern medicine, it's brought down to the level of biomolecules and reduced to, expressions of the body. Whereas in Ayurveda, you have an alternate model. So in anatomy and physiology, there is detailed visualization of anatomical structures and physiological process in modern medicine. Whereas in Ayurveda, we have the concept of Sharira, which I, for lack of time, it's not possible to elaborate it further, but it shows how the body is integrated into a whole. So these are the various aspects of Sharira. So what is the future? I mean, how can Ayurveda contribute to modern healthcare? I think Ayurveda and modern medicine can together bring a meta-paradigmatic framework to healthcare. So it is bringing two models together. Ayurveda giving us a larger and broader framework to incorporate multiple methods of healing, including modern medicine, so that we can look at the whole body in a more holistic way. So, ideas that Ayurveda brings in a meta framework for integrating multiple approaches to healthcare, the three-tier approach to knowledge system. The whole is more than sum of its parts, emergent properties, relationships and patterns, systems view, non-linear dynamics, shift to the study of variability from the study of averages. The Ayurvedic theory of tridoshas is a concept of homeodynamics. Modern medicine talks about homeostasis, as if everything is, static, and when we look at our blood pressure or any value today, we are looking at average. Whereas what Ayurveda points out is the pattern that is important. How your body is adapting, adjusting to the external environment. The ability to adapt and adjust to the external environment is what Ayurveda calls as health. So the last point I will conclude with this slide. What Ayurveda can offer today is a holistic approach, looking at the human being as, a conglomerate of the body, mind, and cell. This is how integrative medicine is even defined today. Integrative medicine means integrating body with self and the mind. So Ayurveda is one of the earliest systems to talk about this. The second thing is nature-centered medicine. This is very important. Ayurvedic globalization, I would say, is a global localization. Because Indian Ayurveda is not relevant for other countries. Today we are talking about Kerala Ayurveda. It is just a commercial, fad. Kerala Ayurveda is relevant only for Kerala because it is something which has been developed according to the climate and the geography. So Ayurveda says, Yasya deshasya yo jantu, tajyam tasya ushadam didam. For people living in a particular locality, so Ayurveda is talking about how you can create a nature, self-sufficient ecosystem of healthcare that is very region and local, very region specific. And this is very, very important. And Ayurveda points out that if nature is not healthy, then we cannot be healthy. So nature comes before the person. Often Ayurveda is referred to as a person-centric system of healthcare. It is primarily nature-centric and then only person-centric. Second, we have person-centered. This is where, today we do research, we do RCTs. We try a medicine on a few people and say it will work on everybody. And then you ask Ayurveda, where is the evidence? We say we cannot create evidence to RCTs because according to Ayurveda, what works on one person will not even work on the next person. So how can we do a randomized control trial? So Ayurveda talks about how to classify, identify individuals and then create treatments that are customized and individualized. The next thing is integration of lifestyle, diet, and medicine. So you might ask, this is already happening in modern medicine. You know that the recent finding is that diabetes, if you get diabetes, if you take medicine, you will become diabetic for life. If you change your diet and lifestyle, you can be cured of diabetes in 2 years. This is the recent study. Hypertension, I am an example. I got hypertension some years ago, and I was told immediately take an antihypertensive. And I decided if I'm going to take antihypertensive, I'll stop this job. And I will not speak anymore about Ayurveda. And I did lifestyle and other changes. And then I understood, as I did my research at the time, that the best approach according to modern medicine also to control hypertension is called DASH. dietary approaches to stop hypertension, which actually cures the disease. The other one is only, controlling the problem. But what is important here, what Ayurveda brings is, Ayurveda points out that diet and lifestyle is the primary treatment. Medicine is only an add-on. Whereas today, where modern medicine stands is medicine is the primary intervention and diet and lifestyle are only support. Another important aspect is mind-body medicine. Ayurveda considers the body and mind, as one continuum. We don't separate it. The mind affects the body and body affects the mind. We say taptajya khadayuri. So a new idea, Ayurveda, one of the earliest systems to talk about mind-body crosstalk. Today we talk about PNEI, psycho-neuro-endocrino-immunology. Now this is a rediscovery of the Ayurvedic idea of manas, vata, pitta and kapha. Manas roughly corresponds to psyche, vata to neurological regulation, pitta to endocrinological regulation and kapha to immunology. So Ayurveda was one of the earliest systems to even give a human model of the human body that talks about this continuous crosstalk between the body and the mind. And once again, I would like to say tridoshas, just very quick. So when you look at tridoshas, it is wrongly translated as phlegm, bile, and weight. Once you look at that translation, the whole insight is wrong. What does kapha mean? Kena jalena phalati iti kapha. Kapha is created by the layer of Prithvi in Jala. So when certain solid particles dissolve in a watery element, that we call as kapha. The next step is the paka that happens in this Jala. This is pitta, tapa, santapi. And when this paka happens in this watery matrix, then life emerges, vata, vagati, gantanayo. So you can see tridoshas recreate the whole origin of life itself. And that is how Ayurveda considers that every time we are looking at the human body at the deep level of regeneration of life, we say that the body recreates itself continuously, and that is why tridoshas mimic the recreation of life. When we eat food, the solid and the liquids are mixed together. And then when our digestive system works on it, the transformation happens. And through that, we get the energy to express both physically and mentally. So, Ayurvedic texts give you, if you study from the original sources, you get very deep insights into. And then the complex formulations, herbal, animal, chemical sources, Jagat, everything under the sun is potentially medicine. There was a story in Takshashila University where the teacher tells the students, you go and bring medicinal plants which have no medicinal value. And only one student comes back without empty-handed. And then, the teacher says, you are the only one who has passed. Because everything is potentially medicinal. And you have Ayurveda, you can see in many places it is very open-ended. And then preventive and predictive medicine, I mentioned briefly also during the discussion. And finally, I would like to conclude by saying healthy aging. This is one area. And as modern medicine is becoming more and more developed, we are going to live with the burden of an aged population who are crippled in their homes. But what Ayurveda says is that we can age healthy. And in fact, one of the wisest things to do, purve vayasi madhye va, when you are in your earlier age or middle age, you have to prepare for old age and death. Because that is the inevitable reality of life. And what Ayurveda tells us is that just like the sunrise is beautiful, sunset is also good. Just like sunrise is like birth, which you celebrate, death is sunset, which you can also celebrate. If you live your life completely, the old age people were considered to be the shelter of the world. Today we are making shelters for them because, they don't age successfully. Old age was the time when people retreated and others came to them for their wisdom, for their support. But today we are making ourselves actually, completely crippled and dependent in old age. So this is healthy aging. And so this is, I think, how Ayurveda can contribute to the creation of a holistic health culture today. And the last thing I just want to conclude by asking a question. Do you know which is the #1 killer disease in the world? Cardiovascular. Number 2, cancer. Number 3, doctor. The third biggest killer today is the medical professions. And this is where Ayurveda comes in. 70% of the global healthcare burden is due to communicable diseases, which are modifiable. And we have created a healthcare system where no more treating these diseases is an option. We don't have the resources, we don't have the ability, and this is going to cause great economic burden, great loss of, human, what you can say, productive hours, productivity. And this is where Ayurveda comes in. So Ayurveda is coming to make our healthcare system complete. It is not against any medical system. Ayurveda is one of the earliest systems which talked about medical pluralism. Ayurveda was techno-savvy. Ayurveda is the earliest tradition to even have some science fiction stories about transplantation. They even talked about head transplantation. Forget about other organs. And we have stories about artificial. So Ayurveda is not against any technology, but it's all about how, the best knowledge can be used in a balanced way for the benefit of humanity. We need Ayus, that is life. We need to preserve life. We need Arogyam, absence of disease, but we also need Saukhyam or Swasthya, this health at a higher level of functioning. And that is what Ayurveda takes. Let there be Ayur Arogya Saukhyam. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Rammanohar, for your valuable insights. If you have any questions to the speaker, we have time from 4 to 6. Due to time constraints, we would not be able to take up the questions as of now. So I encourage you to engage with the speaker during the poster presentations. We have poster presentations from 4 to 6. At the same time, we have tea from 5 to 5:30. All are requested to come back to the auditorium and take their seats by 6 so that we can attend a webinar by much awaited talk by Professor Subhash Kak. Thank you so much.